Bismillah, this is Field Notes Occupation, a Noble Savagery production. I'm Dr. Zara Khan. In today's episode, we are going to be looking at education, women's rights, and the social fabric. And we're going to look at this through a closer look at the Dheisheh refugee camp, looking at the Union of Palestinian Women and what we learned from them, and then looking at a siege in Ramallah that our delegation witnessed firsthand, in which one of our members was actually shot in the head. So let's begin with the Dheisheh refugee camp, which I was speaking about at the end of last week's episode. And originally built for 3,000 refugee camps, when we visited Dheisheh in 2003, it housed 15,000 inhabitants, refugees, Palestinian refugees. For all of these inhabitants, there was one health center, 4 schools, and these schools helped to educate 2,150 children. Even before the 10-year internment of Dheisheh from 1985 to 1995, soldiers would raid homes and confiscate anything, especially books. The lack of a library culture that one found in Dheisheh, we are told, was due to the lack of books. We visited the Ibda Cultural Center and spoke with its director, and this is a place for youth and for adults to come together and have various activities. The mother of the person who we spoke with, the director of the cultural center, his mother would hide plastic bags and bury them under the ground in the earth to prevent Israeli soldiers from confiscating them. Here we find a poem that was written, and the community got together and made a mural to go along with the poem. The author of the poem, unfortunately, did lose her life at 23 years old. But if you see the words here in the poem, it's about being able to change the situation, wanting to change the world, disarmament, and making it safe for everyone, and feeding those who are hungry and sheltering those who are homeless. But the author feels that she can't do it on her own, but she hopes to be able to find more people like her, and together they will be able to do it. The books that were confiscated by Israeli soldiers when making rounds in the Dheisheh refugee camp were not books about chemical warfare or violence against Israel. These were books like Vietnamese resistance to U.S. occupation and the French occupation of Algeria, books on politics and history and social analysis. And what we find is that Israel issued 1,250 executive orders between 1967 and 1995 pertaining to the West Bank and Gaza, to the occupied territories, and order number 854 had to do with students. Any book that a school or library wanted had to be requested through Israeli government officials and approved by them. So the director who we spoke with, his childhood friend, was arrested for having a Frantz Fanon book in his possession. Right? Dheisheh's youth center camp was actually closed for 12 years because Israeli officials decided that it was being politically active. On our visit in 2003, there were 2 schools with 32 teachers each for 1,150 students. They took morning and evening shifts in order to be able to see all the students. There was one clinic, one doctor, who worked for 6 hours a day, 6 days a week, and he saw 200 patients every single day. In the Cultural Center, we saw that they work on making textiles, using microfinance loans to acquire the equipment needed to make textile goods, traditional Palestinian goods, as you see here, and try to sell them and have some sort of a sustenance. You also see at the very top a banner reflecting Ernesto Che Guevara, a revolutionary in Latin America. And many of the revolutionary movements in sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America are very inspirational to Palestinian people, as we found on our trip, because they are because like Palestinian resistance to Israeli military occupation, those movements were also fighting against colonizing forces, occupying forces. Around Jerusalem, 13 destroyed villages were converted to the American National Park, with no residential area for Palestinian people. And the director of the camp asked us, who divides the land? Who designs the fate, he asks us. Who decides which children get a park and which get a BS refugee camp? Here on the wall of the Cultural Center, we found a map of Palestine prior to a Nakba, prior to 1948, and it shows the names of all of the Palestinian villages in their original Arabic name. So for example, Tel Aviv used to be Tel Arabiya, and so on. And here we also have, from the darkest days of Dheisheh camp's history, you had leaders in the camp being rounded up by Israeli Defense Forces. Moving on to women's rights, we in Ramallah, our guide was a woman who was the director of the Union of Palestinian Women at the time, and she really helped us to situate ourselves in Ramallah and to help guide our itinerary. She also told us a lot about the work that the Union of Palestinian Women does. It has 9 branches throughout the West Bank. The Ramallah branch had the elected chairperson, Maha, as well as volunteer staff, and a woman who was the coordinator of 24 kindergartens. In the beginning, the Union of Palestinian Women had some resources, and they ran 58 kindergartens, but after the Oslo Accords, 93-95, European and American funding was severely cut. So the Union of Palestinian Women believes in cultivating democracy by offering free education to Palestinian children. They run schools 6 days a week with only 54 staff teachers. Here is one school run by the Union of Palestinian Women in Ramallah. Here is another. The Union of Palestinian Women also focuses on income-generating programs for women in order to give women some form of financial independence. They teach skills like sewing and knitting, and they also invested in building a restaurant, Taboon restaurant. This restaurant was attacked and destroyed by the Israeli Defense Forces in April of 2003, but the women of the Union of Palestinian Women had rebuilt it. The women also run Berzit University's cafeteria. They have a contract to provide the food for that cafeteria, for that university. Since the Second Intifada, the Union of Palestinian Women has a list of 300 families that it supports every month. They have very limited funding and emergency funds, but they do the best they can with what they have. We were introduced through the Union of Palestinian Women to an artist, Kamal Moghani, who had a gallery called Intifada Paintings, and I will just share these photos with you for you to consider the meaning of this artwork. Looking now at society and the social fabric. When we think about human rights discourse, universal human rights discourse, it pertains to many, many dimensions of human life in society. So civil and political and social and cultural rights, basic safe and health in society, mobility, assembly, religion, the rights to organize, to unionize, physical and mental health, education. All of these are a part of what are considered to be basic and dignifying features of all human life, irrespective of race, ethnicity, religion, and so on. On Wednesday, August 27th, 2003, every single major city in the West Bank was commemorating the 2-year death anniversary of a man named Abu Ali Mustafa. Abu Ali Mustafa was a leader and an activist, and the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine was on this particular day organizing a parade in the city with dancing and celebration and commemoration and, renewing the commitment to resist occupation. Ramallah, a middle-class city, at that time, the restraints of occupation were relatively undetected in Ramallah. Not completely, but compared to other cities, relatively undetected. And they had a rally and a parade planned for that day. Now, 3 days prior to the event, some young men had been arrested by Israeli soldiers for putting up flyers for their event. On 2:30 p.m. on the day of the parade, the youth office of the PFLP was raided by Israeli soldiers. 15 youth organizers who were high school students and Birzeit University students were arrested. 20 small children, that is younger than teenagers, were present at the time that the raid took place. They had been practicing their dance for the parade, and they became very nervous. Some of them became sick, some of them vomited, some of them became incontinent, and they soiled themselves out of fear when the soldiers came and arrested their, basically their big brothers and sisters in this organization. We were just returning from Jerusalem, and when we entered downtown Ramallah and we turned the road onto the central path to the plaza, the driver stopped the car very quickly and he told us to get out. We didn't know what was happening. The first thing that we saw when we exited our taxi was this young man, 16 years old, sitting on the sidewalk. He was screaming very painfully. He had gotten shot in the leg, and some men who were there assisting him, they ran into the pharmacy with an empty bottle of Sprite, and they filled it with water, and they brought it back out, and they were pouring it over his wound. 2 hours later, at the hospital in Ramallah, I would see him walking out, having been treated for his gunshot wound. Now, we were very confused as to what was happening, and this particular street that we turned into, we saw waves of men of all ages, boys, young men, adult men, and older men, all moving like a wave. They would pick up pieces of broken rock and concrete, and they would rush towards the main street where the parade was supposed to be held. They would throw them, and then the wave would all recede back as the Israeli tanks and armored personnel carrier that were passing through Ramallah as they would advance. Now, what happened was that the Israeli military came and started shooting live rounds at the people who were there to attend the parade. Hundreds of men of all ages. We would hear in the distance, sounds of shots fired, and then we would see the men moving in waves. Our delegation got split up. Myself and the other females, we tried to take cover under the awning of a store which had closed, which had shut down. Other members of our group dispersed, and the two people in our group who were videographers had actually, I would come to find out later, run to the front line of the parade where the Israeli tanks and APCs were passing by. One of the delegation members was shot in the head. Now, this particular friend of mine, a brother originally from Yemen, physically presents as Arab. You can tell by looking at him that he is most likely of Arab descent. And so while he was videographing the tanks coming down the street and shooting into the parade, he was sitting right by another delegation member who is not Arab, and let's call my friend Yusuf, right? And he was most likely targeted by the Israeli soldiers because he appeared to be Palestinian and taking a video of what they were doing. And so, by the grace of God, he, it was a rubber bullet, but we do know that rubber bullets can also cause fatalities. Rubber bullets do kill. They're, regular bullets covered in rubber, but they can be quite fatal. But in Yusuf's case, the bullet grazed his left temple and so did not cause a serious injury. And so this is him here in the hospital being patched up, and then he was released later that day. So, while we were waiting to hear about our friend, we saw, in the 20 minutes that we were there, we saw 3 teenage boys coming into the ER, being brought into the emergency room. They were 16, 15, and 14 years old, and they had gunshot wounds in various parts of their body. After some time had passed, Ramallah kind of got back to normal. Stores started opening up again, and we heard suddenly quite a loud commotion. We heard screaming and honking and just a lot of noise, and of course I became very startled. And when we found out what was coming up the street, it was this beautiful young couple, Palestinian couple, who had just gotten married. And so they were coming down in their cab here, decorated with flowers. You can see she's in her wedding dress with the veil, and he's in his suit. And just moments after this siege of Ramallah, in which Israeli soldiers shot live rounds into parade goers, these two people are embarking on their new life together, and all of the people standing on the side of the road where their cab was passing were joining in the celebration. They were cheering them on, clapping for them, and sending them good wishes and prayers. And that really is an appropriate symbol, an accurate symbol of what it means to try to live life to the fullest amidst a military occupation.